Hey everybody, I'm Sig Trent, game designer, co-creator of Everyday Heroes, and punny jokester of Sig Trent Games. Today I'm going to update you on what's going on with Sig Trent Games here in week 14. I'm going to offer up some gaming design advice. I always say gaming design advice instead of game design advice. I'm not sure why. And I'm going to talk about my life in general and what I've been playing lately. All right, so let's get started with week 14 in Sig Trent Games. There's not a lot of different things to talk about, but we're going to go into a little bit more depth today on shotgun fantasy work. So primarily my mission this week was to put down a whole bunch of spells. So I've been working on different spells, trying to figure out my spell system. I'm pretty happy with the way things are going. I've got about 30 plus spells put in there. I think 32 in Shotgun Fantasy and a few more over in the LPJ project because I want the system to support both of these games, game supplements, I suppose. And so for the most part, it's working out really well, but I'm also discovering all kinds of little wrinkles and permutations of changing the spell system in subtle ways. Now, the biggest difference between classic D&D spellcasting and the Everyday Hero spellcasting that I'm proposing is it uses spell points instead of a levels and slot system. Now, there still may be spell slots, as in you can only have a certain number of spells prepared, but those spell preparations aren't divided by level. It's a little more like what you see in Baldur's Gate 3, that kind of thing, where you might be able to select 8 spells or something, and so you've got 8 spells, and they could be of any level that you're capable of casting. In our case, we're going to call those ranks instead of levels, so spells of any ranks you're capable of casting. I am not 100% sure on that. I may let certain classes be free and not have to, like if you make a sorcerer or something like that, you don't have to have spell slots, that sort of thing. But it's going to be very much simplified as compared to, I've got this many first level, this many second level, this many third level, this many fourth level, and upcasting, I change for rank, and I got to have a slot, and blah, blah, blah. So simplifies that down to you have a pool of spell points. Spell costs 1 spell point per rank in order to cast. So if you cast a rank 3 spell, it costs 3 spell points, so on and so forth. One of the permutations of that system change is it allows spells to be a little bit more versatile and a little bit more customizable. So we have enhancements on spells. And if you use an enhancement on a spell, it costs additional spell point and it raises the spell's rank. So let's say you're casting what's normally a rank 0 spell, like a cantrip, but you can boost it up with an enhancement that's going to add +1 to its spell rank. Now it's a rank 1 spell. It costs 1 mana to cast. If you add +2 worth of enhancements, now it's a rank 3 spell. And it costs 3 to cast. I guess 2 to cast. If it's a level 1 and you add 2, that would be 3. But you get the idea. So these enhancements allow me to create spells that have a central theme or an idea. Let's say you're shooting magic missiles or whatever, something really simple. So at the lowest level, you have the most basic functionality, and then you can enhance it by basically adding more damage or more attacks, or making it harder to save against, or increasing the range, or increasing the area of effect of a spell. Whatever it happens to be, you can stack these enhancements up, and it's still going to be magic-y missiles, but they're going to be behaving in a slightly different way. So that, in turn, has more permutations. So let's take a spell like Hold Person. And I don't know if there's a Hold Animal in classic D&D, but there's Hold Person, Hold Monster, right? Well, these spells, they have their own kind of enhancement system in D&D, but it's a lot more wordy. It's cast this in a higher level spell slot, right? A little bit easier to just say +1. So we do it that way. But the idea is I can have Hold Person and Hold Monster essentially be the same spell. We just call it Paralyze. And it paralyzes a creature of some kind. And at lower levels, you can only paralyze creatures that are of a CR or a level that is at or below where you're at. They have advantage if you try to cast it on a more powerful creature, but if you enhance it, then you can take away the advantage that they have on their saving throw if they're more powerful. And it effectively becomes Hold Monster instead of Hold Person. So it gives me a lot more flexibility, and I can kind of get rid of what are essentially redundant spells that are just sort of, here's the level 2 version of the spell, here's the level 5 version of the spell, here's the level 7 version of the spell, and they're each a different thing, but they basically do the same thing. And I can pack that all into one spell. That also has further design permutations, which means that character classes don't need as many spell picks, as many spells in their spell book or their spell allotment, in order to have a range of things that they can do at every level, from level 0 to or level 1 up to level 10, or even beyond that potentially. So one spell can kind of continue to provide the same utility to a character all the way through. And you can cast it at a lower level to make it more economical, so you spend less spell points, or you can cast it at a higher level to make it more powerful, to have more impact during combat. So it gives spellcasters quite a bit more versatility, and it gives game designers quite a bit more versatility, and also makes it so spell lists and spell access can be a little bit smaller. A couple weeks ago, I talked about choice support as a game design principle, and so this really broadens to a degree the amount of choice support I can provide any given class that has access to a given set of spells, or that I can just pack into any one spell and get more effectively usable game content in less words and less space. Also, with kind of my more efficient wording goals, I've been able to take some rather complicated spells and make them a little bit shorter and a little bit simpler to understand and easier and faster to read. On the other hand, sometimes I get a spell where I can think of all kinds of cool enhancements you can do to the spell that didn't really exist before, and now you're actually making a given spell idea a little bit more complex and a little bit more expanded through the use of the enhancements. So you read the spell itself, it's pretty simple, but then there's quite a few options of enhancements that you can change the way it behaves or to do for different things. So one of the interesting ones I was working on was what is in classic D&D, like Mage Hand, and then you have like big B's, this fist, that fist, the other fist. And they've done a little bit of this in 4th edition. They've combined all the higher level fist spells into one spell. I'm going to forget the name, but yeah, it's like Magic Hand or something like that. But under my system, I can even take it down more and make Mage Hand the level 0 version. It's an invisible hand that can move things around. And then as you enhance it, you can get bigger, more powerful hands that can pummel people or grab people or carry you or carry the party, because it's an independent creature that's big enough to pick up other creatures. So you can use it as kind of a different version of levitation and so on and so forth. So you get all kinds of interesting utility out of what used to be like 3 or 4 different spells, and now it's one spell, but it has a lot of different permutations. They all involve an invisible hand moving things around in a telekinetic kind of way, but they're all different types of utility that could be used in different situations. So pretty cool. So that was a lot of fun and get to do a lot of cool game design stuff. But I did get to a point of kind of analysis paralysis where I'm thinking, okay, there's 300 plus spells in like the SRD currently. I'm trying not to just copy spells from D&D, but I also want the kinds of basic magic using things that we all associate with fantasy gaming to be in there, which means I am going to have a lot of duplicate effects of what are originally D&D spells. But I want to do some new things as well, but how many can I actually put into the game? And I'm getting rid of some in some categories, which means some schools of spells will have less spells in them than others. And in other areas, I'm actually adding more spells, like I was doing now again, I'm going to forget the original name of the spell, but it's basically enhance an ability score spell, which would make you stronger, smarter, faster. And all it did was it gave you advantage on those rolls. So you get advantage on strength checks, advantage on dexterity checks, etc. And you pack that into one spell because that's very easy to explain. But I was thinking, like I find that kind of boring. I remember when making your character stronger, you could do more damage, you could be more accurate, you get all kinds of benefits. But 4th edition took away that because modifying ability scores creates a lot of permutations to the character sheet. And I think that was a good choice to take that away, because the complexity that it creates during play is not the good kind of complexity. So what I did is I split those ones up, and so I have, it was like enhance ability. So now I have enhanced strength, enhanced dexterity, enhanced constitution, and they give you advantage on those scores and saving throws and something else, just a third thing that they can do that's related to that. So you get a little bit more of the feel of I'm strong in many different respects, and that strength carries through in combat, it carries through out of combat, it carries through when you're just being surprised and somebody's trying to tip you over. So it feels more like you're really stronger, but it doesn't have the play complexity of modifying your strength and then rejiggering every skill you have and every other thing on your character sheet. So kind of best of both worlds, but that means I turned one spell into 6 spells, so I got some growth. So I'm shrinking spells in some areas and growing spells in other areas, and I'm not sure which spells to make, and I have to make a whole bunch, and I don't want to waste a lot of design time making spells I'm not going to use in this book. So I had to circle back around to another part of the book, which is the classes. Because if you remember the choice support thing, in order to make a class, you want to make sure there are support items available for that class. And since I'm going to have 2 spellcasters, a cleric and a wizard type class, I need to have an appropriate list of spells for them. So the idea was to circle back into classes, work on the wizard and cleric, try to figure out what kind of spells I want them to cast. What are the most essential, important wizard schools and cleric religious domains that I'm going to want to support? And once I've decided that, then I can come back into spells and go, okay, I need to make sure I fill out sufficient choice options for the specializations that I'm offering each of the classes so that their spell lists will be complete. And that will help me guide what spells I need and not waste a lot of time. Of course, if I happen to have a couple spells that I've already done that aren't going to fit into any of those lists, I can either include it as just sort of additional side support, or I can put it in a future product. Every time I work on a project, I always start a file of cut content, stuff that didn't make the cut for any number of different reasons, ran out of page size, you just started it and you change the focus of the book, whatever it is, because I'll probably use that material later. So I don't want to waste any design time and writing time. So I make a file like that. In fact, I originally had 6 classes because I was going to do 1 class for each archetype. Change that to be 4 classes. We're going with the classic fighter, rogue, cleric, wizard to support the game. And so the other 2 classes I had, I think, barbarian and bard, which are cool. Put those in cut content, and I'll develop that into a future book or supplement if people are interested in it, right? Always depends on demand. But I'll be able to use that content again. And I didn't get too far on those. It was just initially outlines for these things. And I did a little tinkering here and there thinking about them. But in the end, I decided to make this book a reasonable size. I wasn't going to be able to support those classes. So cut down the number of classes to just those classic basic D&D essentials. And that's what I'm going forward with. Because this isn't supposed to be a full fantasy game. It's like just enough fantasy so that you can bring it into the modern world, or you can bring modern characters into the fantasy setting and play the mix and match. So it's designed to be sort of half of a game, right? Okay. So that's what I've been working on primarily, and not very much else. Anna's continuing her studies and working on marketing. She got SEO done on all of our videos, like this one. So I'll post the video, and then the description will become much more SEO supportive sometime after that. Oh, what else is going on? Game design tip of the week. Let's move into that. So this game design tip is about power creep. This came up in some playtesting I was doing last night. I was discussing with one of the other players about how D&D has, the current version of D&D has been around for more than 10 years now. So there's quite a few more options that are, in my game designer's opinion, a little broken. Not necessarily totally busting the game wide open, but are clearly more powerful than the kinds of characters you would build with the player's handbook alone, right? That's something I try to avoid to some degree in Everyday Heroes. When I was lead designer at Evil Genius Games, I got to review almost everything that was made within Evil Genius Games for rules content, and I could kind of veto things that I thought were outside the scope, or say, hey, look, that needs to be a little bit more powerful. It's not going to be a very exciting game choice for people. So I was very keeping a mind on the idea of preventing power creep in our game for the most part, and trying to keep it so that if you played a character from the basic rulebook, it will feel just as good, just as powerful as a character from one of the supplements. So basically, I'm trying to avoid power creep. That said, it's almost impossible over the life of a game to do so consistently. So we're going to discuss why that's so challenging and some of the things you can do to try and tamp down on it. This isn't something you really have to worry about too much if you just publish a game and you're going to publish one book and then that's going to be the end of it. It's contained in that book and you're done. It's really about having a game that's a living game that's going to grow. You're going to make more supplements for it. And especially with third-party companies making supplements for it, you're not necessarily going to have control over the power creep. So let's get into the weeds of this thing. So first, I think it's important to ask why power creep happens. I think it's pretty obvious. Most people understand that in order to sell products, the new products need to be exciting in some way. So if you make a book and then everything you publish as a supplement after is strictly worse or less exciting, nobody's going to want to buy that stuff because the good stuff is all in the original book. If you, however, make supplements and there's something a little bit more exciting, a little bit better, and a little cooler, well, then there's a strong incentive for people to buy it. And so power creep is pretty natural in most living games. It's especially true in strategic games, things like Magic the Gathering or Warhammer, that kind of thing, because people invest a lot of money in the stuff they already have. So buying new things, you really need a strong incentive. Role-playing games, generally speaking, are a little cheaper overall as a hobby, and you can make your own stuff up. So there's a little bit less need to power creep, but you're still wanting to attract players to trying something new and interesting. And there's also something that's a more benevolent part of power creep in role-playing games specifically, in that if you offer new, really exciting, powerful character options for players, they're going to really want to play those characters. And that means they're really going to want to play in a game master's game. And then the game master is going to need more powerful, challenging creatures to battle these more powerful characters. And so they need power creep in order to create excitement, to start a new campaign, and to get people going. Now, of course, lots of roleplay purists will say, hey, like, it's about the story. It's about my character. It's not about how powerful they are. Well, Dungeons and Dragons is the original RPG, and it is a hybrid game that's part strategy game and part role-playing game. It has both these elements. Everyday Heroes definitely follows in those footsteps, so it's the same way. So power creep's a real thing, and it can be a lure to get more games going, and getting more games going is a good thing, generally speaking. That said, I still try to avoid it for the most part. So what I like to do to fight power creep, first and foremost, is to be aware of the problem, to discuss it with other game designers who are going to work on the game, and to have a set of standards and yardsticks by which to measure. So when I was working on the Everyday Heroes core game, I made a big spreadsheet of how much combat damage each character could do on average in each round of combat, using the best strategic choices you can make, maximizing the right scores, taking the right feats, etc., etc. Basically, these are the most optimized characters you can build, so far as I could figure out. And they become a sort of benchmark. And if one of them is way stronger than the others, then it had to be tamped back. Now, there were certain characters that are supposed to do the most damage, and other characters that are supposed to be the toughest, and other characters that are best at solving mysteries or difficult social situations. So they each needed to excel at something. But combat is the one you have to be most watchful over, partly because social situations and problem solving are very contextual, and the idea, it's very hard to measure what exactly is powerful. You give people utility and you go, well, this is a thing normal people can't normally do, so therefore it is inherently powerful. But how do I compare having police powers against being able to hypnotize people? They're not really apples and oranges. But in combat, we can say how much average damage can you do per round against a typical opponent with typical armor class, etc. And we can make some real measurements. So we did that. Like some of the most damaging characters are like the brawler, the heavy gunner, the martial artist, the marksman, and in burst, the fencer and the one of the wise heroes, the master. So these are kind of the higher damage characters in the game. And so they formed a baseline, and we would tweak their abilities. And sometimes if we gave, power attack working in a certain way was too powerful with certain characters. So that's why we had to have the offhand rule. No power attack is an offhand attack, because it threw off the damage calculations and it made certain characters just too strong. So there were a lot of things we had to play around with to try and average it out. And then whenever we had a new class that was designed to be an offense damage class, we'd run it through those calculators and try to figure where it falls on the spectrum. And if it's going to be more powerful significantly than those base classes, then that's a problem. And we also use that at level, because this is another thing you need to think about power creep. RPGs naturally have power creep built into the game. You gain levels, you get more powerful, right? That is just assumed as to how the play experience will be and the progression. So you need to have people going up in level. But at any given level, because the characters will generally be the same level and having the same experience, then that level needs to also be balanced. So if too many characters hit a peak at level 3 and they become way more powerful than everybody else, then we need to play with the tools that that class has and maybe move that to a higher level or shift things around or divide up that benefit in some way so that it progressively gets better instead of happening all at once when they first start to get that talent. So there's a lot of things to figure out there to try and avoid power creep, but you can't do it unless you document how strong existing baselines already are. Otherwise, you're just guessing. And when you get into a semi-complicated role-playing game that has a lot of different talents and permutations, it's pretty hard to guess. You can get a good feel. Usually you know when it's just not going to be anywhere near a more powerful one. But every once in a while, the synergies and combinations will sneak up on you. So we got to be careful about that. Another thing we do is you decide parts of the game mechanic space that you can distribute additional power and not upset game balance. And then for everyday heroes and mostly for D&D, that's generally in the space of classes, and if you have a magic system, spells. In the case of everyday heroes, plans and tricks and things like that. So those can be very powerful, and you set that as kind of your top baseline. And then in areas like feats, you're going to try and not offer things quite as powerful as you're going to get from the class abilities. That way, adding feats to class abilities is a lot less likely to overspike the power. Or a class that's on the verge could take a feat that's equivalent to another very powerful class, add that into their mix, and they break the game. Obviously, that's a little difficult with multi-class feats because the whole point is to give out class abilities. But generally, they're very carefully designed so that the class abilities they're adding are giving you more variety, letting you be excellent in more situations instead of simply stacking up power on power on power. So that's one of the ways you do it, having control and having documentation. So it's a little tough when you bring, the more people you bring into the game design process, the more documentation you need to get to share people, and the more control limits you might be able to need to set. But can you? Well, we do third-party publishing at Everyday Heroes, right? I should say Evil Genius Games allows third-party publishing, such as myself. And so you don't really have any control over that. You can, in your license, set up a review process, but it's actually expensive to have your game designers be reviewing other people's game work. And it could be overwhelming, and you don't get a lot of work yourself done. So that's generally not done. It's just entrusted to the third parties to be responsible about doing good game design that's relatively balanced, or signaling to the readers and players of a product that this product is intentionally strong. One of our friends, Owen K. Stevenson, has a series of PDFs called Overpowered Classes or Overpowered Choices or something. And they're intentionally overpowered abilities, and they're a lot of fun. Which brings up another point, which is that in a role-playing game specifically, sometimes being overpowered is really cool. Now, Shotgun Fantasy is in that isekai Japanese idea of, well, it's not always Japanese, but the word is, of taking people into another world. And those other world fantasies often include overpowered characters, because a character comes into the fantasy world, but he still has the power of being able to order from Amazon, right? So they can get like anything that Amazon sells into a fantasy world, which is of course incredibly powerful and incredibly potentially disruptive to the power structure. But that's part of the fun of the story. And that's one of the things we'll talk about in the Shotgun Fantasy book, is how you deal with those situations, because being broken can be a lot of fun sometimes. That's true in strategy games as well, but it's a longer discussion on how you make that work. So there's that. Another way to fight power creep is through diversification, which just means that when you put out a new book, make it new and shiny by having it have options that you've never seen before, instead of ones that are more powerful. If something is new and novel, it will feel powerful and important. So if I suddenly gain the ability to levitate in the real world, something that nobody else can really do, well, that would feel very powerful and cool. But if I go to a world where everybody levitates normally, it's not really powerful, right? Because it's not different. Everybody can do it. So is a cell phone incredibly powerful in a fantasy world? Yeah, kind of. It's not going to win combats, but it could do a lot of things that nobody in that world can do. So diversification is its own kind of power, and I think is sort of the best kind of power creep. So that's what the design approach I always used in Everyday Heroes when I was working with Evil Genius Games, and I'm trying to do the same thing here. Statistically, not to overcome specialized power areas, but to offer new avenues to be powerful in. All right, well, I think, oh yeah, one more tip for power creep, and that is to empower game masters, right? So when you'll see these a lot in the Everyday Heroes core rulebook, where we have what we call GM fiat, and we will specifically say you can do this except when your GM tells you you can't, or subject to the GM's permission you can do this, because we want to bake in the idea that the game master is allowed to rein in the players to some degree when we're in an area that is very open to interpretation in the rules, like exactly what you can use a skill for, etc., etc. And so it's very important to do that. Also, you'll find in Shotgun Fantasy, probably, I'm going to have things called player's notes, game master notes, and designer notes, which will follow a rules section or a class or something like that. And the player's notes will be a little bit like how to use this responsibly or the cool ways you can use it. GM notes are kind of like how this could be a problem and how you can rein it in, or how you can build and expand on it. And then designer's notes are for other people who want to do homebrew and stuff, and they're like, why did I make this? Why is it working the way it is? Why did we use spell points, etc., etc.? Just to give a little insight, which either as a game master and as a player helps you understand the design intent of the game and enjoy it more, I think. So those are all the ways to fight power creep. But again, always ask before you fight power creep whether you need to and whether you should, and whether it's useful to the game or harmful to the game. All right, let's move on to what I've been playing this week. Two things mostly. Stellaris has its 4.0 patch out. Stellaris is a 4X space strategy game that I like a lot. It combines a lot of role-playing elements. I think I've mentioned it before on this, and I come back to it from time to time. It's kind of my habit with video games. I play them for a while, I set them on the shelf, and I'll play them again later. It's got a brand new economy. They changed the way populations work, and I'm always excited whenever a game mixes up its game systems, and I want to come in there and figure things out. My overall impression, like when I first opened up the planet panel and trying to figure out how things are, I was very confused. Not in a bad way necessarily, but just like, okay, I'm trying to grasp the new paradigm, but so many different things have changed. I'm not sure like what steps to take or how to do things. But as I explored the menus and looked at all the options and kind of took some time to explore these things, kind of like I was reading a manual, I started to get the paradigm and appreciate some of the game design changes. Like I think so specializing planets in Stellaris was really important. They can do like make energy, make production, make ships, stuff like that. And if you specialize them, it was strategically a lot stronger. But the way you specialize them was kind of like buried in a submenu, and it was something that wasn't directly suggested to the players. And so it seemed like as good an idea to diversify as it did to specialize on the surface. But this new system definitely takes specialization to the forefront, such that when you colonize a planet, it's going to ask you, hey, do you want to specialize this planet in some particular direction? And then that's going to help you through all the other choices to carry on that specialization. And before you build a lot of buildings, you got to build a district, and you're going to say, hey, this district is for this kind of building. And that enforces the idea of specialization much earlier in the development of a planet. And so that's just something I see there. And so it's leading players to be better players in many ways. Then you might say, is it forcing people to specialize everything? No, not really. You can still make a planet that's very diverse and does a lot of things, but that's more like, now I need to think hard about how I'm going to diversify my planet or ways I'm going to step away from the specialization. So the better play is now the default. I think that makes a lot more sense. I still think there's a lot of options there. It doesn't feel like it's dumbed down the system at all. I do think it's also a little easier to navigate through where the options are. There was one thing I had a little trouble finding, but I did eventually figure it out. So I think it's pretty cool. Now, I will say the overall play of the game doesn't feel a lot different because of this economic overhaul, but the micromanagement of your planets does. And so far, I think I like it better. But we'll see. I heard that the game is very buggy now, but I have not run into any bugs on my playthrough. But I have not even completed a game. I'm just in the very beginnings of a game. I don't get a ton of time to dive into any one game, so I'm sure there's lots of bugs that I just haven't run into them yet. Of course, all my old save games are kaput because the totally different economic system in the game, the save files are not going to work, right? So I didn't even try that. The other thing, notably, I've been playing this week and last week a little bit as well, is playtesting Shotgun Fantasy, essentially. So I did manage to talk our game master, who was running Everyday Heroes before. His players wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons, so they're going to play D&D, and that was the perfect opportunity for me to test Shotgun Fantasy ideas. So I was like, hey, can I play an Everyday Heroes character, and can Anne play an Everyday Heroes character in your D&D adventure? To which the answer was yes. I actually kind of inspired the game master. He's like, oh, it's cool, and he got all these ideas about wizards summoning heroes, and the heroes end up coming from this other world, and how all that works, which is exactly the kind of thing Shotgun Fantasy is for. So that was cool that he was immediately excited by the idea. And so we played 2 sessions now, been through about 3 or 4 combats involving both Everyday Heroes characters and D&D characters so far. It's great. I always said, people told me, oh, the systems aren't really compatible. And I was like, look, you can just take a D&D character and drop them in an Everyday Heroes game. And for the most part, they just play normally. And if you take an Everyday Heroes character and you just drop it in a D&D game, for the most part, it's just going to play normally. You'll barely notice the difference. There will be certain rules questions like, my Everyday Heroes character puts on a suit of plate mail, do I still get my archetype defense bonus? And so these are the kinds of things, balance-wise, I'm trying to figure out as I play this game and observing. There's going to be things, obviously, that are different, and that's part of the fun. So Anne's character has a sniper rifle. Sniper rifle has a 1,300-foot range, 2,600-foot long range. There's no weapon in D&D like that. So we were facing some mounted knights, and they did an attack on us. We beat them up for the most part, and they were running away. So we got 2 D&D characters and 2 Everyday Heroes characters. The D&D characters were able to pursue them a little bit. We don't have any mounts or the capability. One of them has a flying dog familiar, which is almost as fast as the horses, but not quite. However, Anne has a sniper rifle. I have a drone with a 60-foot flying speed and a plan that can double the speed of the drone, right? So technology makes certain things easier to do. So can a drone outrun a horse? Yeah, generally speaking, it can. So we were able to chase down, with my drone, which eventually did get shot down by arrows from some scouts that appeared. But Anne could just kind of sit in the tree line 1,000 feet away and take pot shots at these guys, knocking them off their horse with her sniper rifle. Well, they have no clue what's going on to them. Why are people's heads suddenly exploding, right? So that was a cool moment, made us feel really powerful, and kind of demonstrated there are some things from the modern world that are going to feel powerful and cool in the game. Are they more powerful than a meteor swarm? No, they're not. Right? Are they more powerful than a flying 2-headed dog? No, they're not. They're just very good in that particular situation, where in a fantasy world, nobody really has that kind of an ability. Now, up close, our warlock character is played by a character who really has great mastery of D&D rules, is very powerful. He can make 3 of his familiar. They have like 30 plus hit points each at level 3. He's a very powerful character. Probably more powerful technically than the 2 Everyday Heroes characters we're playing, but our characters hold their own, and they have their own unique abilities that you don't see in the D&D world, so it made it really fun for us. And the likewise would be if those D&D characters came into the modern world and they have a flying magical 2-headed dog, they're going to be able to do things that nobody in that world can do, even though tactical airstrike is probably going to be very bad news for them. So it was very exciting for me because I was having a great time, and the rules were just meshing really well, and everything seemed nice and balanced and cool. So so far so good in the playtest world. I think when people, Shotgun Fantasy will be a little bit of a niche project. Hopefully a lot of people get into it, but I think if people try out this kind of cross-world play, they're really going to enjoy it, and that'll be great, because that's what I want ultimately, is to make a product not just that people buy, but that people buy and they play and they enjoy, and it sparks their imagination. They go, oh, this would be so cool if blah 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 blah. So that's what we're after, and I really enjoyed that. Last, boy, my voice is starting to go. Life in general. So my phone calls last week were a success. I managed to get a hold of my family and talk to them. Had some very nice conversations, so that was cool. Unfortunately, I got a letter from the IRS. I had a little thing with my taxes. I prepay because a lot of it's self-employment, and so you got to pay ahead of schedule throughout the year because they don't like to get all their money at once. They like to get it over the course of the year. There was some confusion last year because I had changes in the amount of income I was getting, And so I thought I had paid more than I'd paid. And it turns out I hadn't. So I got a little penalty and I had to cover the part that I didn't pay. So it's never nice to get a thing in the mail that says you owe more money, but that's the way it is. Such is life. Got to pay the tax, man. The weather's been great here in Ocean Shores, breezy and sunny. I love it. It's pretty nice when the store is not too busy that I work out. Step outside, enjoy the breeze, enjoy the sunshine, watch the seagulls. Customers have been in a great mood, so it's been lovely. Probably take a little walk here on my days off because it's so nice. So that's good. Life is good. Gaming is wonderful. I hope it's the same for all of you. Take care. Bye bye.